Hey there guys, Music Fan here, how you guys doing? With the very rainy and cloudy weather that we're having today, kind of reminds me of the late Chris Cornell and Soundgarden. Ever since his death this past Thursday morning, there's been all sorts of tributes going around everywhere. I mean, you can look up on YouTube. I mean, Corey Taylor did a fantastic rendition of Hunger Strike at the Rock on the Range, which Soundgarden was supposed to have performed, and a lot of great tributes been going on. And it's only fitting that because there's so many tributes going around everywhere, just saying goodbye and looking back at the career of Soundgarden and Chris Cornell, it's kind of inspired me to go ahead and pay my own particular tribute to Chris Cornell via a discography review of Soundgarden, which I'm going to start today. So all throughout this week, in celebrating and honoring the memory and the life of and the career of Chris Cornell, I will be reviewing all of Soundgarden's studio albums, and for the exception of today, the two particular EPs in one review. So each and every day we'll explore and talk about all of Soundgarden's albums, from Ultra Mega OK all the way to their recent album, King Animal. But today we're going to start this discography review with a review of rather two small EPs that the band recorded, Screaming Life and Fopp. Kind of nifty title for the second EP, but anyways. So yeah, Soundgarden formed around the mid-80s, the mid-1980s in Seattle, Washington. The band members, as it appears here, are Chris Cornell, lead vocals and guitar, Kim Thayil on guitars. At this point, Hiro Yamamoto, bass guitar and vocals. He will be until the release of Bad Motorfinger, which he will depart before that particular album sessions, and Matt Cameron, who performs on drums. Of course, Ben Shepherd is going to come in a lot later down the line, but for now we're going to focus on Soundgarden pre-Bad Motorfinger. And so anyway, let's just get straight to this. So yeah, Screaming Life EP. This was the first EP that the band compiled together for their first ever press release, for their first ever release on the Sub Pop label. I think this was under the Sub Pop. I could be wrong. I mean, again, I don't have all my sources correct, so this is going to be also a little bit jumbly, and throughout this whole weekend I've been delving into Soundgarden's discography, and honestly I'm not, apart from the obvious hits from Super Unknown, I'm not that familiar with it, but I am going to try my best to cover as much ground as I can. So yeah, they formed in the mid-80s, and they created the two particular EPs, the Screaming Life EP and the Fopp EP. I keep saying flop. Let's start with Screaming Life. First track, Hunted Down. This is, when I first heard this song, this is kind of a prime example of what the Seattle grunge scene was like around this particular time. You had these very tuned down guitars and almost kind of a punk ethos to it, and a kind of almost this kind of, or at least in Soundgarden's case, is not indicative of the Seattle music scene as a whole. But what I get from this is that there's a little bit of a machismo to these particular tracks. This song in particular. But this is a pretty cool song. Like, I mean, it starts off things really kind of like really right off the gate, like fast and really riff intensive with this particular track. And what I like about this track is just that just the guitars, the way that they are performed on this song, and the rest of the band, including Hiro Yamamoto, performs well on this, and so does Chris Cornell. Honestly, at this particular point, I would describe, if you would think of early pre-grunge Soundgarden, it would be like imagine Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath, and you put those two bands together, and then poof, out you get early Soundgarden. You know, like this was. It's like Black Sabbath if you mixed in with Robert Plant and Jimmy Page, except Kim Thayil is no particular Jimmy Page, but that's okay because nobody can beat Jimmy Page. But anyways, I'm rambling on here. Entering is kind of a weird kind of song, but it's a cool kind of song. It reminds me. It sounds like if you take early era U2, like Boy or October, for instance, if you take early era U2 and you goth it up, and then you have a kind of a Robert Plant like frontman in the front and center leading the band, then that's what you get with this song. At least that's what it is, in my opinion. What Entering sounds like. It's like. The thing about this track is that there's also such a dark atmosphere to this particular song. I mean, it's just the way the guitars are set up, and just the doom atmosphere to this particular song. And what's also funny is that throughout the song, you get like this boom thing that Chris does, that kind of like that presence. Again, there's a bit of a machismo thing going on here. But yeah, it's kind of a dark version of early U2. That's what I get from Entering. Tears to Forget. I mean, this is a much faster, more punk-inspired number. This is a song that has more of a debt to punk than these other songs, and it does a really fantastic job in just putting out the flow between Entering and this particular song. I mean, and Chris Cornell does these really just intense shrieks in this particular song. I mean, it's pretty intense, but just the upbeatness, the fact that this track is a lot more upbeat than the previous two tracks, which was more dark in the atmosphere, is kind of refreshing to follow, like with this punk rock number on here. But that's Tears to Forget. Nothing to Say. This particular song is probably the most indicative, is the most, pardon the pun, but the most foreshadowing of what Soundgarden's sound will eventually evolve into. Like, I mean, I think of songs like The Day I Tried to Live and Blow Up the Outside World and Fell on Black Days, and those tracks. Like, I mean, I listen to this song and I immediately think of those songs. Like, this is kind of like the most evocative of what Soundgarden will eventually evolve into. Again, it kind of has a very dark, very almost gothic atmosphere, but it kind of meets with this Led Zeppelin quality to this song, which gives it kind of a unique character to this track, But for me, this is the most indicative of what Soundgarden will experiment and where they will evolve into later in their career in the 90s. Little Joe. When I first heard this song, I immediately thought, this is like Jimi Hendrix meets Led Zeppelin meets Chris Cornell's not impersonation, but his I guess I don't have another word to say it. His impersonation of Ozzy Osbourne. Again, like, the band really took a lot from Black Sabbath at this point and Led Zeppelin, and they tried to fuse it together. But Little Joe is probably the most funk-ridden number on this particular EP, and it really kind of like marries those two qualities. Not that well. I mean, they weren't really expert craftsmen up until this point. They were still a young band at this point. So it's a cool song, which I like. I mean, I love how Chris Cornell just does his best Ozzy impression on this song. I mean, I kind of like it. You know, I kind of like, you know, his Ozzy thing that he has going on this song. And yeah, that's what I get from Little Joe. Like, Black Sabbath meets Led Zeppelin meets Jimi Hendrix. Yeah, that's what I get from this song. Hand of God. I haven't really checked my sources yet, but from what I know of this track, I think this was I don't know if it was their producer or one of their tour members or something, but apparently somebody found a cassette tape at that time, and it was a tape that had a Christian preacher on it. So they decided to incorporate that cassette tape onto the song, and you have, I think, Chris Cornell saying spoken word lyrics in the song. Yeah, I can't say I have a lot to say of this particular track. I mean, I guess like the speed between the cassette tape and the eventual, the band actually performing is a pretty cool thing in this track, you know, but nothing much for me to note of this song. This next track was not on the original Screaming Life EP release, Sub Pop Rock City. This wasn't on the original release. This was put out on later pressings, and this is probably the most indicative of like how, again, I bring up the machismo part of Soundgarden at this point. It's a fun song, and I kind of like it, you know, but it's not. This is not really indicative of what most people would think of when they think of Soundgarden. Again, the general public sees Soundgarden as like Black Hole Sun and Fell on Black Days, maybe even a little Outshined and Rusty Cage, but you know, rarely, you know, did they ever think of Sub Pop Rock City. You know, like fun little number, you know, but that's just what it is. It's fun, but nothing more. Oddly enough, I kind of think that this was also the era of Poison and Motley Crue, the hair metal genre at that time. So I find it odd thinking that Soundgarden was bringing this very dark, dark version of grunge at this point on in conjunction with that, and yet here's a song that embraces that like, you know, hair metal machismo thing. But that's just me. Overall, it's I think the first 4 songs, I think, kind of spells out early Soundgarden. The other 3 tracks are good, and some are really not so good. So I would probably give this EP like a 3.5. That's just my rating. Now the Fopp EP. The Fopp EP is a lot more upbeat than the Screaming Life EP. Like, I mean, there are covers and remixes in this EP. The first track, Fopp, I I think this is a cover. This song is a cover of the original by the excuse me, the Ohio Players. They were an R&B funk band back, I think, in the 70s. I think the Ohio. I'm not doing too good today, am I? The Ohio Players were an R&B funk band that existed in the 70s, and I don't know too much about them, so I can't really bring up too much about them. But this is a cover of that song, and I have to say, it's a pretty good cover. A pretty good rendition, you know. Again, this is all about, you know, a machismo kind of thing. And even though I'm not really big into that, I mean, this is still a pretty fun song. I think Kim Thayil, I think he had a record of this. If I know my sources correctly, he had the record that this song, the original song, came out of with him. You know, and my guess is that he heard this song over and over and over again. So this was this song, and the remix to Fopp is just so fun to dance to, and it's so hilarious because there's so many different samples throughout this song. I mean, they sample themselves, they sample their instruments, they sample Godzilla. When I first heard that, I was like, what the heck is that? I mean, the remix to Fopp. I mean, this is it's just a fun kind of song, but in the grand scheme of the entire Soundgarden discography, I mean, this has no correlation between the first 4 songs from Screaming Life and the eventual releases down the road. I mean, again, this is kind of a fun thing. But Fopp and the original and the remix, they're pretty entertaining, especially the Fopp remix. I mean, go listen to it on the description box below. That's all that needs to be said. Kingdom of Come. I don't remember if this is a cover or not, but it's all right. I mean, it's a fun song. I mean, again, this entire EP is a lot more upbeat and more fun than Screaming Life, but it's a fun song. And Swallow My Pride, I think it's a cover of another band called, if I can get my thing out, Green River. Swallowing My Pride. It's a decent, nice song, and it's a pretty decent way to close out the EP, but nothing much I can say apart from that. Yeah, I mean, the Fopp EP is a little bit lower. I mean, I'd say like around a 3 or 2.9 out of 5. I mean, there's no correlation between this EP and the eventual releases of Soundgarden, you know, but it's pretty throwaway. But the songs on here are definitely still fun, and they are. I did get such a kick out of all these songs, especially the Fopp remix, which is just so. There's the Godzilla sample in the middle. This is so awesome. But yeah, like the Screaming Life gets a 3.5 out of 5. The Fopp EP gets a 3 or 2.9 out of 5. And 18 minutes just for 2 EPs. That's so weird. But anyway, I have to cut this out before I get too long. So Screaming Life EP and the Fopp EP. Tell me what you think. Leave your comment section down below, and I'll see you for the Ultra Mega OK review. Check it there.